What if you could plant a seed that your contribution could be bigger than you ever imagined? Welcome this lovely afternoon to the Designing Your Legacy podcast. My name is Angelina Carlson, and I'm the hostess. And I look to distill the best practices, positive examples in action, and the best ideas to inspire you. This lovely afternoon, I get to introduce you to Bessie. She is the co-founder of Benefit Capital, the Difference Incubator, and the Impact Investment Center. For the last 20 years, Bessi Graham's work has focused on helping unlock all forms of capital for people and organizations delivering positive social and environmental outcomes. The common theme across the businesses she owns, founded, and runs is a belief in the power of business as an agent for change if you design models that can do good and make money. Bessie is the inaugural chair of the Social Impact Measurement Network Australia and continues to explore the ways we can measure and communicate social impact more effectively. Bessie co-authored a report, Impact Measurement, exploring its role in impact investment with NAB's Elliot Anderson in 2015. Welcome, Bessie.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to have this conversation today.
Yes, thank you for joining from Australia.
Yeah.
Yes. So would you share a little bit of background about yourself? Like, how did you come into this work? Was there a catalyst?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always interesting, isn't it? Because each of us have, and this goes into some of what we'll talk about today that you and I have in common around the idea of legacy. I think each of us have these influences and the beginnings of who we are that come from our family and our upbringing. And so for me, in terms of that background or the journey, I would say it starts right back at the fact that I have this, I'm incredibly fortunate to have had two parents who are very different. So I often joke and say it was like my dad was Gandalf from Lord of the Rings and my mum was this beautiful fairy. Very different people. And so there's that aspect where I've always felt like I've been this walking contradiction, like I have two very different parts of me. And that has sort of played out. And I think if you look even at the combination of, what I've studied and the work I've done, there's these different components of, these deep Judeo-Christian influences and ancient Greek philosophy. So a side of me that's very in my head, the intellectual side, but then also this more of the kind of Celtic notions and these ideas of beauty and aesthetic and how do you actually learn to live in a way where you are in a place of gratitude and taking up and soaking in all of that beauty. And so those kind of pieces really were part of that childhood for me, if you like, and the influences that were on me and led to this desire or search to find those places that were between different worlds, because that's where I feel most at home. And so,
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second.
yeah,
I know that your podcast is called Both and
it is.
you look for those gray areas so that we can find new possibilities, even if human nature wants us to go to these two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Because and that is what you so often find. And I think part of the, again, uniqueness of what I bring is that my fascination and curiosity is in, okay, where do those worlds combine? Where do we create the win-win? And so in your introduction, you spoke about, from a career perspective and some of the organizations I've built, and the focus of my work has been on that idea of, okay, business can be an incredibly powerful agent for change, but only if we build out these models that are saying, how do we do good and make money at the same time without compromising on either? So it's not about going to an extreme, as you said, of like, okay, it's all about profit maximization, but equally, it's not about the martyrdom of saying it's this selfless giving. Yeah.
Right. I think what you're asking is for people to think more for themselves and not just to fall into these templates or these archetypes. So I know one of the things about your background is that you definitely earned your success, that your parents helped you with a network and that they didn't necessarily just give you like a silver spoon out there, even though you can talk with governments and world leaders and so on and so forth. So were your parents diplomats? I was just curious about this. Or were they part of the diplomatic corps?
No, I mean, interestingly, in terms of their training, they both met at when they were studying at university to become primary school teachers. So they were both teachers. and my dad went on to be a minister as well. But they've kind of had this, so they have an education background rather than a diplomatic one. But they had amazing friends, very thoughtful, well-connected people. And so, as you said, I always felt that they gave me an incredible network and amazing people that were also shaping how I thought and how I saw the world.
Yeah, that's lovely, because I know that you were quite courageous. You talked about leaving Sydney to go to Melbourne.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So
yes,
I live in Melbourne now. Yeah, but I grew up in Sydney. So yeah,
lovely. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here.
yeah,
And
go for it.
I know that you had studied, I think it was political science for your undergraduate, and then you went on to study international relations. And you looked at the world leaders, particularly, I think there was a country outside of Indonesia, and you looked at three
Yes.
different leadership styles. And I'm very curious in terms of the connection point of studying that human behavior, and then kind of how that led to coaching individuals with their legacies today, knowing that background of what works, what doesn't work, and how we can
Yeah.
oftentimes self-sabotage.
Well, I think, I mean, for me, it's a full circle moment. So coming back to the work with individual leaders, individual business owners, those who are at that point in their life where they're trying to figure out what is their legacy, how do they contribute? And they now know there is more to this and more to success than just making lots of money. That journey for me has been an interesting one because, as you said, it actually takes me right back to what I studied and to that fascination with leadership and the way in which, how do we influence people? How do we, when we have a vision, how do we bring that about in the world? And that is the skill of leadership. So my one of the main focuses of my research when I was doing my master's, as you said, was in East Timor or Timor-Leste, depending how you want to refer to it. But I looked at the leadership styles of three of the different leaders. So they had come out of this period of intense, really a battle for their independence. And so I looked at the leadership styles of Xanana Gusmao, Maria Alkatiri, and Jose Ramos Horta. And I labeled those kind of styles, if you like, as the charismatic leader, the competent manager, and the diplomat, and then drilled into those different styles. Because I think one of the pieces that taught me, which I use in my work now, was the aspects of situational leadership. So the real importance in any of us, in whatever situation we're in, to be able to understand ourselves well enough to know what we bring, where our strengths are, and how we can uniquely influence or shape a situation, but also to be able to read that situation or read the room, as the old saying goes, of, okay, when is there a point where I may not be the right person to lead here, or what is the way in which I need to tune in to some other skills or a different leader that needs to step in. And I was lucky enough to learn young and early some of those mistakes and the ways it plays out, that actually you can go from being an extraordinary influence or leader in a country or an organization, and if you don't get out of the way when it's no longer that you're the best person to lead, you can undo all of that work. And I think from the point of looking at a legacy, that's a critical thing for us to be conscious of. The process of knowing and leading ourselves first, then starting to have enough separation and sense of our ego to know, okay, this isn't all about me. So I have to know myself, but it's not all about me. It's bigger than me. And then how do I create my leadership style, my contribution, the way I engage, so that I am not just getting stuck in things having to be done the way I like them to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you've talked about is the leaders got to get their head right first before they can lead anybody
Oh
else.
my goodness, yes, mindset.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I found that to be really interesting. So, so you studied counterterrorism, and I was also curious about what is the connection, or is it that when you're working with people who do have access to resources, their realization that if they change one thing, they could upset the apple cart, or what? Tell me about counterterrorism.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at the time, and this is often the case when we are in a situation, you don't necessarily know in advance or have planned out all of the connections. So as I said before, I'm someone I live quite a lot in my head. I'm very curious. I like the intellectual, love learning. And I've always had that fascination with leadership and trying to understand how influence happens. How do people create change? What do movements look like? What has to occur to get people on board? So the counterterrorism piece was really fascinating, and looking at, Middle Eastern politics, different components around, again, those extremes of what does fundamentalism or religion do when we go too strongly to one side or the other. So it was more about my curiosity and wanting to understand those tendencies to turn the world into a black and white, and figure out and understand how to better spend my time in those spaces I talked about before, if I like to be in between two different worlds or three different worlds. Like, what does that look like? And so I think that piece is what is important, more so than it being specifically about counterterrorism. It's the understanding of how humans work and figuring out how to design and create those win-wins that don't push us to extremes.
Yes, I'm also wondering if it has a benefit around self-management, that if we can see the mistakes and decisions in others, we can also self-reflect to say, do I want to go down that road?
Well, exactly. And I think that is one of those pieces of, as I said, I was so thankful that I learned about situational leadership and studied different leaders when I was younger, because it did mean, for example, when I set up the Difference Incubator, one of the things I had as very clear in my mind was that my job was to make myself redundant. So while I was the founder and I was the CEO for 7 or 8 years, I was able to step away from that, even step off the board. I'm still a member of the nonprofit, but I'm not on the board. I'm not the CEO. And so many people said to me, how did you do that? Like, that was your baby. You built that. How did you let go? But that's because I had a separate sense of what my role was, where I added value. And I didn't have to hold on to that. That piece is important.
Well, I would say you set yourself up so that you could walk away.
Yes. And
Yeah,
that it could go on without me, which is
yeah,
important.
and sometimes people, they don't think to set it up so that they can have a successor, so that they can, whatever it is, to have that change element in there. Yes.
Yeah. And that, I think, too, is connected to starting to think bigger. So if we go to some of the aspects around learning from other leaders, or even the counterterrorism things and these, you need to understand how a system works. So if you're trying to create change or contribute to big issues in the world, and when we go to the idea of legacy, that is different for each person, but there is a sense of what will be that lasting contribution I've made when I'm no longer able to directly be doing work on something. Where will my influence and the pieces I have contributed to have made a difference? And I think that is important for us as leaders, because again, we can get so tied up in our own identity being in the work, and the need
But that's
to be
me.
able
That's
to
my identity, Bessie.
exactly, that's my title. And so I think that piece is important for us when we do want to contribute, is to say you do need to think about separating yourself out from that, but being really clear on what you want to create and then what your part is in that.
Yeah. So I'm almost hearing that you have an opportunity to foster self-awareness.
Yes. I mean,
Yes.
that's the starting place, isn't it? It's a mindset shift. It's about knowing yourself well, and the self-awareness is critical in that.
Yeah. So congratulations, you get to design a legacy, and you also get to walk away from it at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and have that again, I think, goes back to that piece of understanding the need for different things within a system. So I always talk to people about the fact that when we're talking about impact at a big level, and I mean that more in the sort of social contribution, environmental contribution, etc., no one person or organization can claim attribution for impact. You won't on your own create impact. You will have certain outcomes that you contribute to and that you can create in the world, but you're going to need to see all of the other factors that play in to create change on whatever it is you care about. And so you're one part of that, but you need to learn to bring on board the other pieces of the puzzle.
And also to be open to hearing different voices so that ego doesn't just take over. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a big thing that sort of leads into a massive conversation around power dynamics, which again, from a self-awareness point of view, starting to, particularly as you become more what's seen as successful or you have capital, etc., power dynamics are important, and you do need to be very conscious of how you're interacting.
Yes, I know that you've spoken into the power dynamics, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But I was curious, where do you see the struggle out there? And if you could have one message, what might it be?
Yeah, I think, in terms of starting with the what would the message be, it comes back to some of what we're talking about of people realizing that regardless of whether you're someone who is driven and, out there wanting to achieve and build things, the message would be that the work starts with you and then builds from there. So it is this piece around self-awareness. It is the aspect of understanding your mindset and what's influencing you. Where is there bias in you, or where are there things that you haven't questioned around your motivations? So the message would be about the importance of that work first and
Yes.
then move from that.
And I was going to add, I think you're also a big proponent of strengths assessments so that the
Yeah.
leader can understand what are their strengths today, because they
Yes.
might be a
Yeah.
different person than they were a decade or two ago. Yes.
Exactly. And that, because any of those pieces, and everyone's different in how they like to do them. My personality, I love doing assessments. I could do them all day. I've done many. And it doesn't have to be that, but it's about the reflection, talking to people you know and who know you well, getting their thoughts on how they would describe you, journaling, whatever you want to do, but it is that journey to understand yourself. So that's sort of that starting point, if you like. In terms of your question around, what are those challenges? What are people struggling with out there? I would say it does all still come back to this mindset piece, because so often when we're doing this type of work, people focus on capital, thinking that's just about cash, right? Capital is so much more than cash, but it's this thing of like, we
Well,
need
money's
access
supposed
to
to,
capital.
right. Well, money's supposed to
Yeah,
solve all problems.
apparently. Yeah,
But
who
I'm bummed.
knew? Yeah. But that sort of, as a starting place, creates a whole bunch of flow on issues, because I mean, you would know from your work, and certainly I've seen it over many years. If we just say, oh, access to capital is our problem, if I had more money I could fix whatever's going on here, too often there are challenges that need to be addressed, that if we just put more money in, we kind of might mask it for a little while. But I often say, if you're already bleeding and you put more money in, you'll just hemorrhage. Like, there's just more money to be flowing out. It doesn't actually address those issues. And so I think starting to help people realize that you need to figure out, okay, what are you trying to do? What's the gap? What do you need? And then, as I said, thinking about capital as bigger than cash. There's the pieces that my parents gave me, right? So there's social capital, there's components that aren't just about money. And we need to think bigger about this. And for me, I always look at time, talent, and treasure as a really helpful lens to sort of, whether it's you thinking about your legacy and contribution, or whether it's you as a business owner in an organization, looking at things from different perspectives is really helpful, and kind of saying, okay, what do I need to do, and where could I draw on those things in a broader way? Is there ways that I could put more time into that? Is there ways that I have actual skill set? I don't have cash, but I've got a skill set I can use. Or is there treasure in either the form of funding from a philanthropic grant sense or investment? Because treasure is broader than just one type of cash.
Absolutely. And I know that you've talked about sometimes the power dynamics when you're working with the funders in a room or the nonprofits, and somebody could have incredible talent. But if they either are struggling with like what you had referred to as the Mother Teresa trap, or
Yeah.
on the other side of the extreme, all of that comes into that room regarding whether that team can get to the finish line. And there's so much more to the conversation and the team building when people can get past those unconscious biases and to know what it is that they bring to the table, and also not to shortchange themselves.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think this almost goes into some of the reasons why I love doing this work, and the piece I love to draw out, because I find I can spot someone's brilliance. I can see what they bring often before they can. And so it's the piece, if you look at Plato in Symposium talked about the fact that the greatest calling for every human is to be the midwife for the soul of the other. So it's this drawing out of what is already in someone else. And I see that very much in my work. I'm not making you something you're not. I'm helping draw out what is already there, what is uniquely you. And that, in those aspects of power dynamics, that's part of the work that's really critical, because if someone is able to get very clear on the value they bring and can come into an interaction as an equal, not saying, oh, I need your money, the old, Oliver, please, sir, I want some more, but can instead say, here's your challenge. I've listened to you. I understand your strategy. I know what you're trying to achieve. And here's what I bring that can address that for you. That changes the power dynamic.
Yeah. And it also feels like somebody's not asking for a handout.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that shift is important. But I think that's at the heart of the work that we can do in this space, is just bringing clarity to people of, okay, what is it you do? How do you bring value? And how do you communicate that in a way that shifts those power dynamics in a more healthy way?
Yeah. Yeah. And to move a lot of those biases out of the picture so people won't be operating out of the assumptions. So I think you mentioned that you started your career working for 2 philanthropists. So can you shed any light on what are some of the concerns, if any, that funders have today, whether it's philosophical concerns or otherwise?
So I think if we look at the world of philanthropy, one of the pieces that's really a challenge when you're working in that space or with funders that have that type of capital is that there's this challenge. So I felt very strongly this push that they were saying, they wanted things to be innovative and push into new territory and to do things that others weren't doing. But then their risk appetite and their conservatism was very strong. And so it was then, but Bessie, prove to me, is there precedent? Who's already done this? Have you already done it? What? So there was this.
I want to be the first.
Yes. So they, at a board level, or those that are making decisions on what to fund, there's a desire to be groundbreaking, innovative, all the words, right? So that's about, again, their own sense of who they are and who they want to be. But then the discomfort at the level of, but don't let me fail. That's very strong. Sorry, I think you're going to.
I just find it humorous because leadership takes a lot of courage, but still it's asking them, well, gosh, don't you want to be the first to jump off that cliff? You're going to help society and humanity so much. Come on, let's go first. And they're like, well, who else has jumped, Bessie?
Yes. And I think one of the ways that, if I think about the way to deal with that, I like alliteration. So I used to always talk to them about the fact that I would say there is aspects of this work where we are pioneering, and there is aspects of this work where there is precedent. So both of those P's are present, but let me explain to you and be very honest and clear when we're in the pioneering space, and I can't prove anything to you, but there are definitely, so say, for example, in the impact investment space, many people in the last 10 years have come into that area who were not part of the earlier journey. There's decades of track record around ethical investment, and people came into it thinking they were groundbreaking, and look at me investing in, and it's like, there's a lot of precedent. There's decades of track record demonstrating that you can make money from consciously choosing where you place it and caring about those things. And so it's about with philanthropy and some of those challenges and the philosophical bits, again, and you'll see this pattern in everything I do. It's understanding that human nature of this desire. There's these things that seem like contradictions. There's a temptation to want both, but then a discomfort that means we tend to lurch heavily to one side or the other. And I think from a philanthropy point of view, that is really present around conservatism, not actually understanding that if you were honest about philanthropy, it's got the highest risk profile because you're guaranteed, 100% guaranteed, that you will lose 100% of that grant. So it's risk, but there's not the concept is different.
Yeah, I think where you're pointing the flashlight is they're still human. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, even though they have money.
So don't put them on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Yes, again.
Well, and I think you've also spoken into the contrast between that there is this desire to be affluent today, but oh, by the way, here are some of the difficulties that come with that.
Yeah. And things you've got to think about and grapple with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And who do you have to talk to about that?
Exactly. You, me, there's lots of us.
Well, I just think that as a part of that journey, people want to do good and they don't realize what comes with it. It's like what comes with success and what comes with failure. Oh, they didn't talk about that in school growing up or at the dining room
No.
table, per se.
And there's an assumption that giving away money is easy. To actually give it away well is not easy. And I think, again, this comes back to just understanding the nuance and respecting the complexity of that, because I always talk to people about the fact that good intentions aren't good enough, right? So we can't just have good intentions.
Well, yeah. And I think it's also so interesting that there is an education piece to giving. And
Yes.
yeah, and people don't know that sometimes going in. Yeah, how much
Mm.
that I have to learn, or that there is that learning curve in place to do it well for
Yes.
the
And
results.
look, I think we do a little bit like we have to let the philanthropists be human. It's the same for those of us who are in a phase of life where we're spending a lot of time building a business or still ramping our career. These conversations, in terms of some of the focus of, say, the one-on-one work that I do, when someone is at that point where they've either sold the business or they've come to a crossroads of there's headspace and the really the luxury to be able to think about these things differently, that's an amazing opportunity, because you've realized that you've ticked those boxes externally, but now you go, there's more to this, and wanting to dive into that is where you can then do some pretty exciting work to set yourself up to feel both the sense of fulfillment and satisfaction, but also to genuinely contribute in the world.
And I think it just to add to what you're saying, it brings more fulfillment and meaning to the individual's life. And I think it's also a journey, not just for that individual to put themselves out there and to continue to grow, beyond their successes, but it's a journey for their team, for coach and client, for the everyone, because it's like, wow, look at
Absolutely.
what we can make possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say a better world looks like?
In terms of that, I think it does come back to this win-win. So it's about allowing us to think about what we truly want. So again, we've talked about this a lot today, but not just accepting without question what other people say we should be aiming for or what success looks like, but the deep creation of a genuine win-win. So I often talk to people about a double-sided legacy. You mentioned some of the ideas that I speak about related to, say, the Mother Teresa trap. So not wanting to fall into that martyrdom of it's all, okay, I've been successful, now I need to give it all away, or it's all about the other or selflessness. Both of those things, a genuine win-win, that is both sustainable. We can keep that up without ending up feeling resentful or like we've been taken advantage of. But it also, as we've said, creates this beautiful situation where you have thought about things from multiple angles. You've brought in the right people, the right skill sets, and you have gone beyond just having good intentions, and you're taking responsibility for what it is you are impacting in the world.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're pointing to is, other than the positive role model of Mother Teresa, we can also find other examples so that person doesn't have to say, oh, there's only one way, even if that leaves them in a
Exactly.
place of resentment because they gave too much away or it wasn't what they wanted. And so these are the nuances. So I know that
Yeah.
we're kind of coming up to wrapping it in a moment, but I was curious, as you get to help others with their legacy, what is the legacy that you would like to design? And I think this question is just so important, again, because a lot of times it's not on our radar, because we're
Yeah.
so busy with the mouse wheel of
Yeah.
life and survival.
Yeah, so I think, again, and I used that quote earlier from Plato about that midwife idea, but there's also this sense, the beautiful Irish poet John O'Donoghue talked about that same idea, but spoke about it more in relation to being, how do we be that midwife for the emerging landscape of the soul of someone else? And I like that creative aspect, right? So for me, in terms of the legacy piece, it's that the helping people shift away from that sense of scarcity and being able to, how do we give from a place of overflow and abundance? So that is what I'm trying to create, because I do think that has beautiful flow on effects into people's families' lives, into their relationships, as well as meaning that the piece that I've often seen in the last 20 years where good intentions have actually made problems worse, not better, will address that and will address the other side. So the piece for me of, if I can achieve that win-win through my work, it's that I've shifted the desperate sense of scarcity or inappropriate ways of giving and brought it back to being this deeply human thing that is life-giving.
Yes, and I think you've also defined legacy, correct me if I'm wrong here, that in your words, legacy is more than we realize. Legacy, I remember in one of your prior podcasts, something that it's when we realize it's bigger than just our life.
Yeah. I mean, and that is when I speak to that double-sided piece, again, it's just taking in, looking at the system from a bigger place. So, and also I think it's important, everything doesn't have to be big. So it's not just scale, like it might be that it's broader than you thought, or it might be that it's deeper. So each person's version of that will be different, but I'm trying to draw out the uniqueness of what will make that satisfying and fulfilling for you, not for someone else. It is an individual journey.
So what values do you get to honor, or principles, when you get to do this work?
Well, it's interesting. I spoke about sort of the influence of my family growing up, and definitely those values are still a part of my work, which was around sort of the aspects of independence and work ethic and perspective and social justice was my family's core values. But for me, it is the components related to my own sense of legacy, the aspects of beauty, and it's a much longer conversation, so I won't go into it now, but beauty is one of my core values, because for me that speaks to the difference between, it's kind of the opposite to all types of fundamentalism, so not falling into one category or the other, but appreciating the uniqueness and drawing out the beauty in things. That is a central driver as a value for me in my work.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's like bringing out the best in people, because you must have looked out there and saw the suffering and you said, the suffering's not beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing that's beautiful, and this goes to some of the aspects of when you are someone who's an entrepreneur or focused on solutions, you see the suffering. But the exciting piece, the bit that energizes you, is to fix that. Like, we can change that. So the energy goes to the seeing of the solution.
Yeah, I know one of the things that coaching shines a flashlight on is it shifts the conversation from the what's wrong focus to the what's wanting to happen. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Again, it's that awakening possibility is always what's exciting and life-giving.
yeah. Are there any final thoughts as we draw to a close?
No, I mean, you mentioned the podcast. If people want to just sit with this more, my podcast is called Both And with Bessi Graham, but otherwise they can go to my website, bessigraham.com. And I would love to just have some conversations where, if people are at that crossroad, at that place of trying to think about what their legacy is in a different way, that's the space where I love to just dive into that with people and help explore it more.
Lovely. I just would like to say thank you for making the time this early morning in Melbourne, Australia, to talk about this subject and to speak into it, into its complexity, but also that there are resources available, there are coaches available, and just that you're embracing being a positive role model for others that are out there, that they don't necessarily have to be that first pioneer. But there are others that are taking the calculated risks and setting the precedent. So thank you so much. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, please rate and review, or if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us this week. And thank you, Bessie, so much for your time and your thought leadership.
My pleasure.